There's a fine line between a game that's challenging and a game that's tedious. Usually, the difference is critical thinking. Games that require you to think out and plan how you're going to solve a situation and advance to the next stage tend to be enjoyable and entertaining. Games where your enemies are bullet sponges and you must defeat several of them at once are not necessarily fun. They tend to be more tedious and time-consuming. The Evil Within 2 walks that line very delicately for most of your experience, but it manages to stay on the side of challenging most of the time. I wrote the script for this review while I was completing Classic Mode, and did not include a whole lot of information about this key aspect. But I realized that this is the central aspect of the entire game. It's not about the psychological elements or the horror, it's about the gameplay, and this fine line that you're constantly walking. So before I get started, I need to let you know two things. The first is that I did not play The Evil Within. In fact, I'm not sure I even knew it existed. I came into this game knowing nothing about the characters or the events of the first game. I'm mentioning this because I felt I could adequately deduce much of the information about the first game through the cinematics and in-game files of this one, so it's not necessary to have played the first installment. The second is that after playing the game on all 4 difficulties, I must say that the only way to play this game is on Nightmare, in a dark room, alone. I completed my initial playthrough on Nightmare in about 32 hours, so everything I will show and tell you will be in the context of Nightmare mode unless I state otherwise. With all of that said, I'll do my best not to spoil any main plot points in case this video makes you want to purchase it for yourself. So let's start with a quick rundown of the aesthetics. The graphics are okay. I wouldn't call them amazing and I wouldn't call them bad. They're certainly not the best next-gen graphics you're going to see. The character models and their faces are similarly okay, and the facial animations are decent, while the lip syncing by the supporting characters is not always very good. The textures look good, and most have plenty of detail, although there is some horrible clipping in certain areas, and some egregious pop-in. The environments are detailed with smooth palettes, some of them looking very majestic at times, particularly the wooded areas and Limbo. The setting shifts from one overall theme to another, from darker to brighter about halfway through, and I'll get into that much more later, but I'm telling you this now to highlight the variation in the world. You're not just looking at one backdrop the entire time. Another great feature is the music, and sometimes lack thereof. There is almost no music during gameplay except when enemies are alerted to your presence. Instead, the game uses an ominous heartbeat-like percussion piece that plays over the gameplay, which I love. It adds a ton of anxiety and realism. After nearly 24 hours of playing with little to no music, it is a welcome arrival in Limbo, one of the most serene moments in the entire game. Almost like the coyote scene in Collateral. So much action and suspense, and here is this brief, calming moment. It works perfectly. But one other thing I must mention is the technical performance, or again, lack thereof. I hard crashed 7 times on the PS4. Now to be fair, they usually occur during loading screens, so it didn't affect my progress, but it became extremely annoying. I also experienced my fair share of glitches, like the game freezing up immediately after my first takedown of a Harbinger, which added insult to injury. After hours of trying to kill those things, and I finally do, and the game freezes up. The AI, while at times is very good, can also be downright stupid. Like right here, where they don't see my partner. I mean, come on, who wouldn't see her right here? Sometimes, though, they take it to the other extreme and have Wolverine-like senses and immediately find you despite your stealth. Now, this may be tied to the difficulty, but still, it can be a little ridiculous how they become alerted to your presence so easily. Now let's get back to what I was saying earlier about gameplay and the theme of using your brain during combat. In short, the gameplay is good, well above average for sure. Though what keeps it from being great is that it fails to add much innovation. Immediately I noticed the similarities to The Last of Us. The scarcity of supplies and ammo, the extreme emphasis on stealth and creating distractions with bottles. Even the enemies in the first half of the game look and sound almost exactly like the clickers. In addition to health, you have a stamina meter that depletes when you sprint, and at an even faster rate when enemies are alerted to you. I really like this wrinkle. It adds to the stress you already have. Knowing that you can't always run from your enemies means that you will have to stand and fight. At your disposal are guns, a knife or an axe, and a crossbow. The guns are straightforward, but the Warden crossbow is possibly the most critical weapon in the game. The bow shoots harpoons used to stick enemies like spears, shock bolts which chain electricity to enemies, explosive bolts which create the obvious explosions, and smoke bolts which stun your enemies and leave them in a haze in which you can perform sneak attacks. Speaking of sneak attacks, you're going to be performing these constantly, sometimes exclusively. With the extremely short supply of ammo, you're going to have to be sneaking your way around across the landscape. So there are usually many ways to approach a situation, not just in terms of style, like stealth over guns blazing, but within those styles are different ways to utilize the tools at your disposal. This is what makes the game, in my opinion. The need to plan out and think about how you're going to advance. If you find yourself needing to advance through an area with multiple enemies and you don't have enough ammo, you can lure them all together by throwing a bottle, then fire an explosive bolt to get them all at once. Or you can fire a shock bolt that will put them on the ground, allowing you to stomp their heads in. Or you can take out their legs with the shotgun, then stomp them on the ground. Or you can use a smoke bolt to put your enemies in a daze, then use any of the aforementioned methods, or use the time to escape. No two situations are alike. What works for some might not work for others. I love this aspect because the difficulty forces you to think instead of presenting you with bullet sponges that you must simply wait out until they're dead. The environment provides mechanics that will aid you in combat. For example, a fire hydrant can be opened and you can shoot a shock bolt in the water. You can kick over an oil can and shoot it to set your enemies ablaze. You can honk the horn in a bus, luring them to you, and then they'll walk right into the traps that you've laid out for them. The cover mechanic works well, and it better because you're going to spend a lot of time in the game using it. You can take cover behind walls, vehicles, boxes, the typical stuff, but you can also hide in foliage, bushes, tall grass, that sort of thing. The movement from cover to cover is very easy and practical. You simply look at the next object you want to hide behind, and press X and you'll sneak over there. You can also move around corners easily using the left stick, so sneaking around is simple and effective. I do have to mention though that the camera angles while you're in cover do not always work very well, particularly in foliage, which can be detrimental because you're trying to locate where your enemies are to attack, but you can't see them without moving around to find the right spot, which will sometimes take you out of cover and into death. It's not like Doom, you can't just run and gun your way through because you'll run out of ammo fast, and the conservation of resources is an integral part of this game. In fact, it sort of creates a game within a game. Instead of only worrying about combat, you must manage your resources so that you can survive. I love this aspect. It made scouring for resources essential, not just another thing you can do on the side. You have to check everything: trash cans, bushes, hidden away areas. It made my love for exploration rewarding, as you pretty much have to rely on scraping up as much as you can. You can also loot your dead enemies, which goes back to my point about stealth. In a way, it's a symbiotic relationship. You sneak kill your enemies, then use the resources you obtain from killing them to become better effective during combat. Then, after you finish engaging in combat, the process repeats. This is especially critical for boss fights, and there are plenty of them. Most of them are difficult to beat, but even non-boss enemies in the world pose a serious challenge. Enemies like these cannot simply be killed with one sneak attack. It takes two, three, even sometimes four or five. So the choice is yours. Do you want to take the risk and go for the sneak, riddle them with bullets, or use a combination of the two? This is a good opportunity to move into crafting. You'll be crafting tons in this game, and this system works great in my opinion. First off, there are two ways to craft, at a bench and in the field. Field crafting requires more resources than crafting at a bench, which adds to the difficulty. You must actively seek out benches and keep tabs of where they are in the world. Otherwise, you'll be spending around 1.5 to 2 times the resources in the field. You can craft every type of ammunition available, as well as syringes and medkits. The components that comprise these items are found on dead enemies and are also hidden in the world around you, again adding to the need for exploration. Crossbolts are the more difficult to craft, as they require an additional resources instead of just gunpowder. Sometimes though, you'll simply find bolts hidden around. It is at a bench where you can also upgrade the weapons you have using weapons parts, again found in the world. You can upgrade their firepower, load time, and clip capacity, among other things. I think the crafting system is fair because even though you find that it's hard to obtain certain items, the challenge adds to the immersion. You want to keep going, and going back to my point about thinking of new ways to approach combat, you really have to use your head and plan out what you're going to do before you do it. It isn't simply running into a situation with guns blazing. You'll find out fast this is not effective on Nightmare, and without conserving your resources, boss battles will be almost impossible, and I'll show you a perfect example of that later. Alright, so boss battles. Nearly every chapter features at least one boss battle, sometimes more than one, and they are some of the most difficult sections I've encountered in quite a while. Each boss is unique. They deal their own attacks and have different movements. What works against some might not work against others. Resources during these battles are a necessity. Without an adequate supply, you're going to struggle a lot, and you might not even be able to beat them at all. You will also have to monitor their movements and become accustomed to their attacks, so you can carefully plan how to dodge them, then parry them with your own attacks. Again, I loved that you had to think and plan out how you were going to approach each one. There are other gameplay elements like puzzles and mind games, ranging from the embarrassingly simple to the almost complex. The progression system allows you to upgrade and gain new abilities that will aid you in combat. The system is good and fair, and you can pick and choose which abilities to improve based on your style of play, although stealth and health will pretty much be a necessity. There's also a shooting gallery where you can improve your gunplay and earn rewards for achieving high scores. And if you're a collector and trophy buff like myself, the game offers plenty of collectibles and hidden items you can find during exploration. Statues hidden around the world contain keys, which are used to open lockers that contain everything from gel to weapons parts to crossbow bolts to syringes and ammo. There are also mysterious items which serve as Easter eggs that reference other games by Bethesda like Fallout 4 and Prey. There are also files and journals that will provide you some backstory. I've talked a lot about the difficulty associated with Nightmare Mode, and I can't stress it enough. I found this game really hard at times. Sometimes I actually thought there was no way I could advance to the next chapter because it was so hard. But while at the time it got me frustrated and hating the game, after I would complete said stage, I realized that it made the game better. I've mentioned conserving resources and thinking and planning out your attacks. You definitely have to. But sometimes you also just have to learn from trial and error. In addition to manual saves, the game allows you to load from autosaves, and I found this extremely helpful, particularly during this part. This sequence is from chapter 16. Not only was it hard, but I actually completely ran out of resources. I had no ammo and nothing to craft with. So I literally just ran around like an idiot for a couple of minutes and thought I was going to be permanently stuck on this part. But I reloaded a previous autosave and used only stealth kills to take out these guys from the previous section, while the first time I was lighting them up Rambo style. I conserved everything I could, then went back with new life. I felt such a sense of accomplishment when that stupid thing went down. If you take away nothing else from this video, I hope you remember this. This, in my opinion, summarizes the game to a T. Sometimes you will have to combine critical thinking with perseverance to complete it. But with that said, there were a few select sequences that crossed that line into tediousness. Certain sections where using critical thinking were not necessary. You simply had to wait them out. I can take replaying a section several times where I keep failing if I know that it's because there's something else I could be doing better. But at times I felt there was nothing else that could be done. If you don't have the right resources the game expected you to have, then the game folded its arms and said, do it right. These sections are few and far between, and I did eventually complete them after hours of replaying, but these sequences stopped being fun and became tedious. Now let's move into the second part of this review, the story. In short, it's very mixed, but leaning more towards the negative. Sometimes I was engaged and hanging on every word, but sometimes it was downright boring. The game was marketed as a survival horror game with psychological elements, and that's a big reason that I bought the game. I love being disturbed. But I feel that The Evil Within 2 failed to deliver on its promise in that regard. It's not a scary game really at all, and there's very little psychological horror, although I guess it tries. The spoiler-free summary is that you play as former detective Sebastian Castellanos, who goes into STEM, a sort of Matrix-like virtual reality simulation, to find his daughter Lily. STEM is run by Mobius, a corporation working towards establishing a connected conscience, that is, everyone in the world having their brains connected with universal thoughts and feelings, with STEM serving as the simulation containing those consciousnesses. As he enters STEM, he arrives in a place called Union, to find it has become overrun with horrific creatures and the world itself has started breaking apart. Along the way, Sebastian is helped by members of the search team Mobius previously sent in to find Lily, and he is guided by his former partner and Mobius agent Kidman, who communicates with him from the real world. Throughout the story, Sebastian is haunted by painful memories relating to his experience at Beacon Mental Hospital, which I deduced was the setting of the first Evil Within. Specifically, he is most troubled by the death of his daughter and the disappearance of his wife Myra. These painful memories sometimes manifest themselves in the form of terrifying monsters that chase and torment him. I mentioned at the beginning that this game is not scary, at least to me. The jump scares are obviously telegraphed, and as a result, I almost always called them out before they occurred. And since I never fully became engrossed by the narrative, the psychological elements to me were not very disturbing. The only somewhat creepy parts are with the anima, specifically the little song she sings, which plays out of the PS4 controller speaker, which I liked. I thought that was a nice touch. Other than those sequences, I was definitely disappointed with the lack of horror. Like I said, I was attracted to the game because it was billed as a horror game, but it simply didn't scare or disturb me at all. A strange aspect of the story is that the overall theme and tone completely changes about halfway through. The first half is spent hunting down deranged serial killer Stefano, who sees himself as an artist, and as a result performs these horrifically gruesome murders often fashioned in the form of a work of art. The tone in the first half is dark and gloomy. The color palette is mostly green, blue, purple, that sort of thing. The textures are gritty and the architecture and set pieces look almost gothic in nature. Then halfway through, everything abruptly changes. You are no longer chasing Stefano. You are going after this other guy, another madman, hell-bent on destroying the world by fire. He calls himself Father Theodore, and he demands Sebastian join his cause in order to seize Lily and use her power as the core to control Union. The tone is now brighter, lighter, everything is red, yellow, and orange. The clicker-type monsters from the first act are replaced with Theodore's harbingers, who wield flamethrowers and set everything ablaze. These elements make the story muddled and unfocused. There's no true single antagonist. One is revealed halfway through, and another is revealed almost at the end of the game. And even though I like the premise that the main antagonist is Sebastian's inner demons, which actually makes for a compelling argument since you spend a lot of time literally fighting manifestations of those demons, it comes out as a jumbled mess that hurts the overall narrative. And as a result, I didn't find any closure when the story was finished. Not to mention that there's post-credits sequel bait, which I despise. Going off this, I feel that the characters, except for Sebastian, who you spend literally the entire game getting to know, are very thinly developed. Your companions are nothing more than generic supporting cast members, and I never cared for any of them except for maybe Torres, simply because she's so badass. The antagonists, like I said before, don't make compelling enemies because you don't spend enough time with them, and their motivations are basic, to seize Lily and use her power as the core to control Union. Nothing more to it, really. Speaking of Lily, for being what I consider to be the central focus of all the plot, She's extremely underused, nothing more than a MacGuffin for which little to no backstory is provided. This lack of character development means you don't feel that attachment and therefore lose some interest. The cinematics are visually appealing and well executed. You can tell the animators and artists spent a lot of time perfecting the look and feel, but it's mostly style over substance. The voice acting is solid, so everything is there except the dialogue. It's pretty cliched in my opinion. At times, I really didn't care at all to watch the cutscenes because they can be downright boring at times. There are also some questionable plot points that I had a hard time understanding. Without spoiling anything, I'll just say that I never fully understood the rules of STEM. Some people within Union have powers to manipulate the world around them, but it's never explained. Why? How? Why can't Sebastian? He's being watched over by Kidman, who is overseeing STEM, so why can't she upload similar abilities into him to help his cause? And before you say, oh, it's about Lily, whoever has Lily has the power of the core and possesses those abilities. Well, then why couldn't said people just automatically kill Sebastian so that there's no threat? And at the end of the game, you learn a certain character has the ability to destroy Union and take out the threat at Mobius because they assume the power of the core. Well, how can someone simply assume the power of the core? How is that done internally instead of externally in the Mobius control room? To me, these seem like important plot holes, but maybe I missed something. The last thing I must mention is what you unlock after you complete the game on any difficulty. Two specific new modes, Game Plus and Classic. Game Plus means you start a new game on any difficulty equal to or lower than the difficulty in which you completed the game. You get to carry over all weapons, ammo, abilities, collectibles, and upgrades from your previous game. This made me want to go back and chase down all those items I missed the first time through, so I could obtain that platinum trophy. And then there's Classic mode, in case Nightmare was too easy for you. It's the same modifiers as Nightmare, except there are no autosaves, and you only get 7 manual saves throughout the entire game, meaning that when you die, you don't get returned to a checkpoint, you go back to the main menu. You also cannot upgrade any weapons or upgrade any abilities, so you go in with nothing and you leave with nothing. Classic mode is definitely very challenging, but going back to what I was saying before, tediousness becomes prevalent in certain areas, which makes classic mode frustrating. And instead of that accomplishment I felt the first time I completed the game, instead I just felt relief that it was over. But nevertheless, these two rewards for completing the game add hours and hours of more gameplay from a different perspective, giving the game a much higher value. Overall, this game was very entertaining, and although I was extremely frustrated on multiple occasions with the difficulty, I can look back and say that it made the experience much better. The aesthetics are pleasing, the combat and progression systems are well executed, and the performances by the voice actors are very good. But it fails to deliver on its promise of being a psychological horror, as there aren't very many tense, hair-raising moments. It also doesn't have many innovating features and sort of recycles a lot of its content, and I experienced way too many bugs and glitches. The story did not do it for me though. I found it unfocused and cliched, but the gameplay more than makes up for it. So my final score for The Evil Within 2 is a 7 out of 10. It's a solid game that I would recommend to almost anyone, even if you aren't a fan of survival titles. I'm confident in saying that it's well worth the $60 price tag. You can easily be entertained for over 40 hours like I was. Plus there is a ton of replayability with the Game Plus modes and Classic mode, if you don't mind the frustration. If the price comes down to $50 or lower within the next couple of months, in my opinion, it's a steal, and you should snatch it up. Hope this video was informative. Feel free to comment down below and share your thoughts. And as always, thanks for watching.
Farewell.